Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to This Explainer. We're going on a little journey today to uncover a pretty fascinating truth. You know those delirious fantasies? The monsters that literally kept our ancestors awake at night? Well, they're actually deeply grounded in reality. Human history is just packed with tales that seem utterly impossible, things that look like they were cooked up by the wildest imaginations. But if you look closely at art, or chemistry, or really any field of human creativity, you start to see a pattern. The legendary beasts and ancient myths we all know, yeah, they didn't just appear out of nowhere.
Nothing is lost, nothing is created, everything is transformed. The famous chemist Lavoisier hit the nail on the head with that one, and it perfectly captures the core philosophy of our investigation today. Human imagination? It acts as this massive filter. It takes very real and often terrifying real-world observations and transforms them into myth. Sure, sometimes that inspiration gets heavily distorted. It becomes almost unrecognizable by the time the story is passed down through generations. But in the 10 cases we're exploring today, the real-world references are undeniably clear.
Section 1. Terrors of the Deep. We'll be exploring the geographical hazards and marine biology that absolutely terrified early sailors.
And this brilliantly illustrates the point. Take the legendary myth from Homer's Odyssey. The hero Ulysses is confronted with a seemingly impossible choice, right? He has to navigate this narrow oceanic strait. On one side, you have Scylla, a bloodthirsty monster with multiple heads just ready to snatch his sailors right off the deck. And on the other side, Charybdis, a massive submarine beast sucking entire ships to the bottom of the sea in a giant whirlpool. Ultimately, Ulysses chose Scylla. He decided it was better to lose a few men than the whole shebang. It's an agonizing choice in the story. But look at the geographical reality, the Strait of Messina in Italy. Early sailors navigating this extremely narrow passage faced a terrifying natural whirlpool on one side, which became Charybdis, and treacherous, jagged, sharp rocks on the other, which transformed into the many heads of Scylla.
Now let's look at another legendary sea beast. We all know the epic novel of Moby Dick, right? The obsessive Captain Ahab relentlessly hunting the giant albino whale. Well, that giant white whale and the vengeful captain, they really existed. But the reality was a lot less glamorous and far more tragic. The real whale was named Mocha Dick, named after the island of Mocha where it lived, and it was notorious for destroying real ships. It was literally treated like a mythological monster by the whaling community. The real-life captain who hunted him was Captain Pollard. But unlike the grand dramatic showdowns in fiction, Pollard's reality was devastating. His ship was wrecked, and even worse, when he managed to get a second ship later on, that one sank too. The ruined captain ended up spending the rest of his life working quietly as a night watchman.
Let's move from whales to something even more alien, 14 meters. I really want you to take a second to conceptualize that massive scale. That number reveals the true size of the real-world counterpart to the legendary Kraken. For centuries, you had sailors whispering about a giant, mythical sea demon dragging ships to their doom. Was it a giant octopus? Well, science eventually gave us the colossal squid. Reaching up to 14 meters in length, it is terrifyingly compatible with the legend of the sea demon. And here is the scariest detail. It's not just about the size, or even the suction cups on its tentacles. Those suction cups are lined with sharp, pointed teeth to help it secure its prey. Just think about a 14-meter creature with toothed tentacles the next time you're relaxing on a beach.
Section 2. Giant Beasts of Land. This is where paleontology and apex predators meet global folklore. And it's so interesting how pop culture hits like Game of Thrones and Twilight have completely revived these ancient terrestrial fears for a modern audience.
So let's connect some famous myths to some very real biology. First up, direwolves. Popularized by fantasy shows like Game of Thrones, these aren't just big dogs. They were real prehistoric wolves, much larger and stronger than modern wolves, sporting terrifying saber-toothed fangs. But why did they become a myth instead of a modern pet? Well, they required massive amounts of food. As they evolved into scavengers, kind of like vultures or hyenas, they simply couldn't compete with smaller, more agile wolves, or with human hunters, and they went extinct. Next, dragons. Back in the Middle Ages, long before the science of paleontology was even a thing, people were digging out massive, unexplainable dinosaur fossils from the earth. Naturally, they attributed these colossal bones to giant, terrifying dragons. And finally, we have the imugi from Korean mythology. These were said to be giant, cave-dwelling snake pups that lived for thousands of years before becoming majestic, winged dragons. Their real-world inspiration? Massive anacondas. Snakes so incredibly large, they just absolutely spark the imagination of anyone who encounters them. So, what does this all mean? We just established that giant dragon bones were actually dinosaur fossils. But what about the fire-breathing part of the dragon myth? Well, we actually have dragons living among us today, the Komodo dragon. Now, they don't literally breathe fire, but a bite from a Komodo dragon is packed with such intense, deadly bacteria that it causes a fatal infection in a matter of days. Victims literally describe the pain as a severe, agonizing burning sensation. When you combine massive ancient fossils with the very real, burning, deadly bite of a giant lizard, the fiery lore of the dragon makes perfect sense. Section 3. Legendary humanoids and warriors. Grounding the myths of hobbits and Amazons in actual archaeological evidence. It is absolutely wild that modern archaeological digs have provided hard proof for some of our most beloved humanoid myths.
12,000 years old. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that staggering date. In Indonesia, scientists unearthed the remains of 9 distinct skulls that were incredibly small, about 1/3 the size of an average human skull. Initially, people wondered, is this just a group of individuals with a unique growth condition? But the skeletal formation led scientists to a startling conclusion. These weren't just anomalies. They represent an entirely distinct species of ancient humans. Real-world hobbits that actually shared ancestors with us, much like Neanderthals, and actively competed in the evolutionary chain right alongside early man.
And speaking of hard proof, let's look at the fierce warrior women of myth, the Amazons. The Greek historian Herodotus recorded this wild story. He claimed women were captured in mass, put on ships, but they actually fought back, overpowered their captors, and formed an independent warrior society. Later, they met Iranian Scythian warriors. But instead of fighting, they forged an alliance, marrying on the condition that the women's warrior traditions wouldn't be stopped, but celebrated. Sounds like a movie plot, right? But the archaeological proof is undeniable. Excavators found graves in these exact regions predominantly filled with female skeletons. And these weren't peaceful burials. The bones displayed distinct violent marks from battle strikes, and they were buried directly alongside their swords, daggers, and bows. The Amazons were absolutely real.
Section 4. The Tower of Hubris. Hallucinogenic warfare and monuments of failure. We're getting to the climax here, exploring the terrifying extremes of human behavior.
Have you ever heard of soldiers so fierce they seemed like immortal demons? Long before Hollywood movies, and even predating Jesus, the berserkers were striking terror into the hearts of their enemies. Think of epic tales like Beowulf, where a hero slays monsters with a simple sword. In reality, these warriors achieved a state completely devoid of fear, pain, or hesitation through intense chemical enhancement. Their pre-battle routine involved consuming highly potent hallucinogenic drugs. This included specific mushrooms or toad venom containing an active compound called bufotenin. This biologically hijacked their nervous system, essentially turning them into unstoppable, numb killing machines that could decimate entire armies. It wasn't magic, it was toxic biology.
And finally, we look at the ultimate monument of human hubris. Take the story of the Tower of Babel. The myth goes that a united humanity tried to build a monumental tower, a stairway straight to heaven, but were struck down by divine intervention and scattered with different languages. Well, the historical reality is equally fascinating but much more grounded. It was actually the temple of the god Marduk in Babylon. Alexander the Great found it in ruins and wanted to rebuild it, but he died before he could. Over the centuries, endless attempts by many rulers and peoples to reconstruct this massive monument just failed. They actually ended up damaging it further. Why? Simply because the various neighboring groups refused to cooperate with one another. Fiction and reality blur perfectly here. The Great Tower didn't fall because of a divine curse, but simply because of humanity's stubborn disunity and inability to work together.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative question. We've seen how colossal squids became the Kraken, how tragic whaling expeditions became Moby Dick, and how ancient ruins sparked tales of dragons. Human imagination is constantly transforming the world around us. So, looking at the science, the wildlife, and the incredible events happening in our world right now, what creatures of today will become the mythical monsters of tomorrow? The reality we live in is just as fascinating and sometimes just as terrifying as any myth. Keep exploring, and I'll see you in the next explainer.